Dogworks Radio Network presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert Forto and you're listening to our 2021 Iditarod coverage here on Dogworks Radio and Mushing Radio. You can find all of our episodes over on KVRF 89.7 in the Matsu Valley if you still listen to the radio in the car. Otherwise, you can find us anywhere you find your podcasts as well as dogworksradio.com. And tonight I am joined by my co-host Alex Stein, and he's calling in from California. Alex, how's it going tonight?
It's going pretty well tonight. We have some interesting stuff. We're at the point in the race where it's traditionally a little bit slow. A lot of people taking their mandatory 24s and other rests, but surprisingly, or maybe not, because things are always happening on Iditarod, we have a lot of stuff going on right now.
We do, and before we get into the big news of the day, which is the COVID withdrawal, we do have a musher that scratched. What do you know about that?
So Christopher Parker scratched at McGrath. He had 8 dogs on his team. We had mentioned him last night that he had dropped 4 dogs at, I believe, at Nikolai. So he was not doing great in terms of the number of dogs. I don't know exactly why he scratched, but my guess is that it had something to do with the condition of his team and the fact that he only had 8 dogs, which is rough, given that he would have to go all the way back up the Alaska Range again.
So it has him as a rookie. Do you know anything about Chris Parker? Is he running a puppy team, or are they his own dogs, or do you know?
I'm not sure. I thought he was running somebody's puppy team, but I'm not positive about that.
All right, we'll find that out and report on it tomorrow for sure. But the interesting news is a COVID withdrawal, and it happens to be Gunnar Johnson. And this was a little bit to be expected. We thought about, not necessarily with Gunnar, but, as COVID develops, we thought that something could happen like this. So I'm interested to hear your take, and I wonder what the difference is between this with a withdrawal and a scratch. And, there's a lot of complexities to this, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is. And, I have to say I have enjoyed the last few nights where we've been able to talk about Iditarod and the race and the dogs and not mention COVID. But apparently that's over, at least for now. So according to the COVID protocols that the Iditarod put in place, all of the mushers were tested before the race started, and then they were all tested again when they got to McGrath, which is, for most people, like 2 or 3 days after the start of the race, more or less. And the other part of the plan was to institute what they referred to as a bubble. So you wouldn't have a lot of people coming in or coming out. All the race officials and the volunteers who went up the trail had all been tested, I believe, multiple times. The mushers were being tested multiple times. And the plan was to set things up so that the villagers and any outsiders who weren't part of this bubble wouldn't have any interaction with the mushers, wouldn't get too close to the mushers, which is a really good plan, in theory at least. There were, however, a few kind of loopholes that people started talking about before the race started. I think most particularly that there was no requirement for handlers to be tested. So the mushers could bring 3 or 4 handlers. They were supposed to bring handlers who had been conscientious in following protocols about COVID, but there was no requirement for the mushers to have the handlers tested or for Iditarod to have the handlers tested. So that's sort of a little bit of an oversight, I think. And then also, despite all of the best efforts and encouragement of Iditarod to keep people away, that's not really possible over the course of a 1,000-mile or even an 850-mile dog sled race. So, the Iditarod said that people were not supposed to come to Deschka Landing, and they were discouraged. And there were not all that many people at Deschka Landing, but watching it, it was clear that there were probably somewhere between 50 and 100 people who were there. And, the mushers are all excited because they're going out on the trail. And sometimes people would step up and high five the mushers. So it wasn't, the bubble wasn't as strong, I think, as some people wanted it to be. And then there's the other part of this, which is, I don't want to present myself as an epidemiologist, but I've had conversations with people who are doctors and with a couple people who are epidemiologists, and my understanding is that people who have been exposed to COVID often but sometimes they don't become symptomatic at all, and sometimes there's not enough of it in their system to test positive for sometimes 5 days or sometimes as long as 14 days. So even though somebody had a negative test before the start of Iditarod, it's possible that they actually had been exposed and that the virus was building in their body to the point where it could be picked up by these tests. So this is all kind of a complicated and difficult thing. There's also, reading just before we're recording this, that the ADN is reporting that the Iditarod has been able to narrow down the number of people who might have been exposed to Gunnar Johnson and might potentially have caught COVID from him. They say that it's a maximum of 3 people, including 2 mushers who had shared a tent with him the night before in Nikolai. So they're going to track those people down and retest them, and then out of an abundance of caution, which makes a lot of sense to me, they are now going to retest all of the mushers when they go through McGrath, when they're coming back towards the finish.
Very interesting. And what is really fascinating is the withdrawal and the quickness that they reacted to this. Pretty much as soon as he was tested, they gave him the quick test. I don't know the names of these, but they gave him the quick test, and then they found out he was positive, and then they did 2 other tests on site, and then they quickly segregated him into a tent, an Arctic oven tent, where he was in effect quarantined, and then waited for removal from the checkpoint, and of course on down back to Anchorage, I assume, and then just like any other withdrawal or scratch. But I can imagine, Alex, that Gunnar was not too happy. Of course, there's not a lot you can do about it. If you're exposed, you're exposed. But he was withdrawn, which is a little bit more severe than a scratch. A withdrawal, at least to me, thinks that your hand was forced and you don't have much of an option.
Right. And going in, all of the mushers knew that this was what was called for in the Iditarod COVID protocol. So they all basically have agreed to this ahead of time. And one of the things that it called for is that if there's a positive test, then they do other tests. In this case, they did 2 other tests to confirm that it is an actual positive and not a false positive, which does happen. There are false positives, but they all knew that if they tested positive and it was confirmed, they would be withdrawn from the race. But you're right, it is a little bit more severe, and I think, at least traditionally, the Iditarod has preferred not to withdraw mushers, so they've tried to give the musher the option of scratching. I don't think that's the case with these new COVID rules. I think they just want to make it automatic and have it be the same for everyone. And of course, hopefully, this is an isolated case, and there won't be any other cases. But it's even with trying to do everything right, there's all of these intangibles. There's the handler factor, that there might have been handlers who were exposed. I haven't been able to track this down and verify it, but I've heard a couple rumors online that some people have said that Gunnar was vaccinated or at least got one of his shots, but it's not clear when that happened. And there are some weird cases where people get their first shot and still are susceptible. So it's a bit of a mess.
It is. And I have just two final questions in regard to this topic, Alex. I know for the last year, you've been pretty much having your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the COVID epidemic and all that goes with it. And you do a lot of research and commentary online about it. So I would say that your opinion matters here for sure, other than just kind of speaking into the wind like a lot of people do about these things. But what are your thoughts about this? Because I can imagine, and I haven't read a lot of the online posts, but I can imagine there's a lot of "I told you so," "this was going to happen," that sort of thing. And then secondly is, what do you think is going to happen in the next week or so? Do you think that there's going to be more people? Do you think it's going to be an outbreak? Do you think that this is going to be something that becomes a much bigger story than it is right now?
I think to answer your second question first, I think there's a couple ways it could go. I think the way that we all would prefer that it goes is that this is an isolated incident, that nobody else is positive, and that the race will continue with perhaps people being much more careful and there being much more of an effort to make sure that everything is done by the book and the onlookers are kept away and that the bubble is really maintained and strengthened. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that the people who were exposed to Gunnar may themselves be positive as well. It's not clear that that's likely to happen because Gunnar was asymptomatic. And while people who are asymptomatic can still infect people, they tend to have a lower, what they call viral load, so they are not as infectious. And again, I'm not an epidemiologist, but this is just my layman's understanding of it. So if there is further exposure, I think that the Iditarod has systems in place where they can isolate people and really stop this from spreading too far. Now, of course, Alaska is kind of fortunate in that there just aren't that many people in Alaska. It has a very low population density, especially once you get outside of Anchorage. So that is helpful. And also a lot of these villages have essentially been on kind of modified lockdown for 11 or 12 months. So that's stopped a lot of the disease from spreading to some of these remote villages. And as you know, Alaska has been very, very good in terms of getting vaccines out to people, especially getting vaccines out to people who are in remote locations. So all of that makes me feel more confident about this than I might have, if this had happened like a month ago.
And quickly, the first part of that question, Alex, are there a lot of "I told you so" comments already floating around, or no?
Yeah, yeah, there are, and as you might imagine, the sort of political dividing lines for how COVID in general and the idea of masks and social distancing and all of that, those have just been reinforced, and unfortunately, people are sort of retreating back to their political corners. I did want to mention one more thing about Gunner, and we were going to talk about Gunner a little bit more in depth today, but one of the cool things that he was doing in his Iditarod run is he had a cousin who had committed suicide, I think about 10 years ago. And so he had dedicated his Iditarod run this year to suicide prevention and suicide awareness of potential suicides, and had gathered the names, either people physically sending him names or sending him names online of people who had committed suicide. And he was carrying them with all these names with him. And then at the end of the race was going to burn all of these names as a way of releasing all of that energy, and then was going to put the ashes into the river so that they could be carried out to sea, which was a wonderful and very poetic thing. I imagine that he will still be able to do that last part in some sense at some point, but I don't know when that'll happen.
Very good. Alex, let's do the next section here sort of in a rapid fire round, because we definitely want to make sure we get to our Musher profile of the night. My understanding is you have a quick update and or story from a very long-time listener about the trailers, the number of sleds you can have on the trail, and carrying dogs. What do you have? Yeah,
so long-time listeners may remember that a few years back, Dallas Seavey was sort of infamous or famous for having a trailer behind his sled where he would put dogs in, so that he would be running usually about 8 or 9 dogs at a time, and then carrying 4 or 5 in this sled. They changed the rules to make that illegal. And it seems that they've changed the rules back so that you can now do that again. And I hadn't realized that, but our longtime listener and fan, Katrina, emailed me about that and pointed that out. And I went and double-checked the rules, and there is, in fact, nothing that I could find there anymore about not carrying dogs in a trailer. But the interesting thing I did find is that there now is, and I don't recall seeing this before, a maximum number of sleds that any musher can use. So you can now only use 3 sleds. So that means that you can, have a sled shift out to one of the checkpoints and change out in the middle of the race. But the interesting thing is that these trailers, and as we discussed, almost every musher right now has some sort of trailer behind the sled. The trailers count as the sled. So if you go out with a sled and a trailer, that's 2 of your 3 allowed sleds.
Yeah, I did not know that rule either, and like you said, for many years that was illegal to be able to have that constant rotation of dogs for rest. Now it's always been legal, and that's the reason you have a sled bag, is to carry injured dogs in your sled bag, and that is a mandatory gear requirement to have a bag that can hold a dog. So it's really interesting that they changed that rule. I wonder if that happens to be with this year's wackiness of the race with the different format and all that, because I don't think it was allowed last year. Next thing on our list, again, rapid fire here, Alex. It appears we have one heck of a race. A lot of folks have taken their 24s. That top group is really fleshing itself out, and I would say by later tonight or early tomorrow, we're definitely going to see who is the front runners of this race, don't we?
Yeah, and we have, I think, about 6 or 7 teams that are already in Iditarod and are resting there. We have 4 teams who are past Iditarod and heading back, and that's Dallas Seavey, Ryan Reddington, Richie Deal, Pete Kaiser. So it is becoming, as they like to say, it's really becoming a dog race now. There's a couple of weird things involving the tracker for people who have the tracker on Iditarod.com. And yesterday, when Brent Sass was the first person to get to Iditarod, the tracker listed the mileage of Iditarod at 412 or 416. And now the mileage of Iditarod is 432. So I'm not sure exactly what happened, but they seem to have bumped up the mileage on everyone, perhaps to make up for the fact that they're not going to flat. I'm not really sure. The other interesting thing is this afternoon, when the first teams were leaving Iditarod and coming back towards Destin Landing, the tracker was, instead of their mileage going up, they had the mileage of teams starting to go down again as they were going back towards the beginning and the end. They seem to have fixed that since, but it was broken in that way for a few hours this afternoon. And as you might imagine, a lot of the people who had the tracker were very upset about that.
And I just have a real quick update. I came across this afternoon a live feed on YouTube from the Krill Pets folks, that organization that sponsors some of the mushers, Dallas and Yor and a couple of others. They have a live feed which is free over on YouTube. You can search Krill Pets, and I would assume it's very similar to the Iditarod Insider. You can see different checkpoints. I watched it for a bit, and they had both McGrath and Ophir, and you could see teams coming and going, and there was even audio on this live feed. And I wonder how they get that exceptional internet to be able to do a live feed in some of these remote checkpoints. I think that's pretty cool. And definitely check that out. Alex, real quick, anything else before we jump over to our profile?
No, let's jump over so that we don't go too late. So tonight's Musher profile is Ryne Olson. She was raised in Durango, Colorado, and on her 13th birthday, her parents either had the foresight or made the mistake, depending on how you want to look at it, of giving her a sled dog ride for her birthday, and she basically fell in love with dogs and with the idea of mushing. She left college after 2 years because she wanted to pursue mushing, and she started doing some races and helping out at other people in Montana and Michigan. Then she moved to Alaska and worked as a handler for FC Kennels under Ali Zirkle and Alan Moore. And in 2012, she ran their puppy team in Iditarod and finished in a very respectable 31st place. She started her own kennel a couple of years later and ran and finished the Yukon Quest. Then she got her pilot's license and went back to school, finished her undergraduate degree at University of Alaska at Fairbanks in 2014. She has a kennel called Rhino Kennel and has about 40 dogs, and also on her property has, I believe, 6 or 7 reindeer. And she said that there's nothing quite like the bond that she has with her dogs, and that she feels when she's running a dog team and driving these dogs and being responsible for them. She's raised almost all of the dogs in her kennel from when they were puppies, and just delights in watching them develop and helping to train them. She has a great race blog where she details, or her social media people detail everything that's going on each segment of the Iditarod Trail. And a lot of that stuff is also on Facebook, but you can find it at rynokennel.com. That's RYNO Kennel. She is also part of something called the Chaina Outdoor Collective, which offers musher tours, multi-day expeditions, aurora tours, and reindeer tours with her reindeer. She has, out of her 14 dogs that she started with, 5 of them are on their first 1,000-mile race. And 9 of them either have run Iditarod or the 1,000-mile Yukon Quest before. And her dogs that she has right now, or the dogs that she started with, are Dolly and King, Louie, Goblin, Thresher, Smokey, Etta, Oryx, Wingman, Maple, Fast, Mario, Bowser, Uno, and Yoshi. She has 13 of those 14 dogs. She dropped Uno in Nikolai because Uno had a swollen tendon in one of her paws. She said that Bowser is on his very first race ever. Etta raced the Goose Bay 150 with her, and she said that he just has amazing potential as a leader. Goblin is a dog that she describes as a total badass. He's 8 years old, so his days as a serious racing sled dog may be limited, but he raced with her in the 2016 Iditarod, which was the first Iditarod that she ran with her own dog. So it's a very special thing that that Goblin is with her. And she described Thresher as a perfect back pocket leader. So he does really well in team or wheel, but when she needs him, he'll step up and be a really good leader. So he's sort of in training, I think, to be one of her important leaders in the years coming up. And one of the cool things about Ryne, I mean, there's many cool things about her, but one of the cool things is that she very clearly is someone who can do extremely well in this sport. And this is her third Iditarod, which is, the point where it's no longer quite as new, and now people are concentrating on really moving up, being able to get a top 20 finish or maybe a top 15 finish. She's currently in 18th place, is doing extremely well. And I think that this is someone who, if she has the interest and the financial ability to go forward and keep racing every year, I think this is someone who could be a real serious contender within the next 5 years or so.
And for folks that are longtime listeners of our show may remember, we had Ryne on our show, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years ago, probably in between those 2 Iditarods that she ran in 2012 and 2016. And I'm looking at her career archives, Alex. You had mentioned that she had, in 2012, she was in 31st place. In 2016, she was in 59th place. And it was a 13-hour difference between those 2 years. But look at all those spaces in between there in that 13 hours. It's a really make or break in that top group, isn't it, with the amount of places and, of course, prize money and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, once you are not in the top 10, even if you're what we call in the money and you're making more than the $1,049 in prize money, chances are if you're in like 18th or 19th place, that's not going to be enough to really cover very much. It might cover your entry fee, but it's not going to cover, the cost of running your kennel for a year. So really, for a lot of mushers, they run Iditarod for love because they want to be in these amazing, beautiful places in Alaska and they want to be with their dogs. But this is not a money-making endeavor for most people. And even the top, 4 or 5 teams in the world, they don't make all of their living from prize money and from mushing.
Yeah, and there's a great story from Dallas right before the race started where he said he won the Iditarod and picked up a $70,000 check and a brand new truck. And 2 weeks later, he wrote a check for $76,000 for a half a year of dog food. So that shows you right there that this is definitely not a money-making sport. And I am sure that in one of these shows this year, we'll talk about prize money and purse breakdown and all of that as we move forward, especially as we get closer. Alex, we are out of time. Anything else you want to mention?
No, but I think tomorrow we'll have Tony back, and also I think we'll start to have a much clearer sense of who the top pack is, the back of the pack, and sort of the middle, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that as well.
Very good. On behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto for Dogworks Radio. Be sure to check us out on social media by searching Dogworks Radio. We'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio.